this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. July 20th, 1969. I remember where I was. I was actually with my grandmother and my grandfather. I can't remember if my mother was there or not, but I do remember watching Neil Armstrong descend from that lunar lander and set foot on the moon, and it was like a miracle. I remember my grandfather saying it's fake. But you know, I want to talk about a case today that actually is older than the lunar landing in 1969. As a matter of fact, the case involves a high school student who was aware of space travel, was aware that we were going to the moon, and maybe with her friends, she had watched it on a TV in classroom before we ever set foot on the moon, waiting. But it's a day she never saw. Because in March of that same year, she was found in a ditch, slaughtered. And the reason I'm telling you about this case is that after all these years, there's now been an arrest in 2024. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, my favorite toy growing up, bar none. I loved my G.I. Joes, but my favorite toy growing up was Major Matt Mason. I had everything. They were rubberized. They had wire in the body, and it was all about the moon. It was about going to the moon. They had the rover. You remember that weird looking car?
Yeah, the lunar rover.
And then they had the bubble. They had this bubble thing with these legs that would roll across the surface, and you had the interior of the orbiting vehicle, that went around. It was amazing. It really was. And as kids, we were all excited about that. And life, even though that was so complex, we had no appreciation of it at that young age. But life was so much more simpler back then. But Dave, I got to tell you, when we begin to talk about this case today, horror is still real. It was real back then. We just didn't see as much of it, or were not exposed to as much of it. But Dave, this case, it rivals anything that we cover nowadays, on a weekly basis on Body Bags.
It's evil. And the thing that bothers me about cold cases is the families that are left behind that live with it. Because I can't imagine what that's like. I can't imagine the frustration they go through. And in particular today, as we were talking about, in 1969, Mary Kay Heese was 17 years old. And think about what was going on. In 1969, we had the moon landing in July. We had Woodstock in August. And smack dab between the two of them, Mary Jo Kopechne was killed.
Wow.
Ted Kennedy, Chappaquiddick. So all of that was still yet to come, months
Hang on,
away.
I got to make a note of that. we got to do that on Body Bags. Okay. Yeah.
And so,
Mary Jo Kopechne. Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
So Mary Kay Heese, her murder goes unsolved for many, many, many years. And what I did in prepping for this, I looked up to see those who are trying so hard for so many years to follow this. You realize that family and friends set up a tip line for Mary Kay Heese. They were still, Joe, 2 years ago, I looked up a post they had, or let me see, wait a minute. In 2022, okay, March 26, 2022, 53 years ago today, 1969, Mary Kay's life was taken by this enraged killer. Although we haven't posted for a while, I assure everyone we have not given up. We are still coming for you, and we will continue until Mary Kay gets justice for the person or people who took her life. For everyone that has kept us encouraged, we thank you. For those who know, again, we ask you to come forward. That was written 2 years ago. And I'm so thankful that at least today, Joseph Scott Morgan, we actually have the answers that this family and these friends who have taken the time to post and keep things active on social media, doing interviews with the press, just banking on the fact that somebody knows something. And you know what? Somebody did know something. He knew. And when they came for him, holy mackerel, Joseph Scott Morgan, I was watching some of the news piece on it, and I'm thinking, there's a murderer who has gotten away with murder for most of it, 55 years.
Yep.
You think he's banking on going to the grave with this? He didn't.
Yeah, and he was. I know, you know, who in their right mind would actually believe that that it would be possible to fly under the radar? What is this? 55
years, Joe.
55 years.
Yes.
Yeah, you would think 55 years later.
You'd think you got away with it.
Yeah, that you would think that, you know, boy, I really slipped that. You know, I slipped out of the clutches of the police. They'll never figure out that I was involved in this in any shape, form, or fashion. And I can only imagine can you imagine when the cops showed up at the accused home? You know, he's sitting around, he's lived. Now, I don't know, from me, maybe he's different than I and you, but, you know, I'd be consumed with guilt after all of these years. And it's like a cancer, I would think. Yeah. And some people are not capable, I think, of sensing guilt. You know, they're devoid of that for whatever reason. We can, you know, go down the path of psychological, you know, pathology and all that sort of stuff. But for him to have escaped justice for all these many years is something that is amazing, and that they would be able to find or identify someone that they really like for this case.
A suspect. And I'm glad you did say that, because, you know, no matter how we feel or think about anything in our country, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yes. Yeah,
and, you know, and we need to remember that, because I don't know the person accused. I don't even know the evidence yet, because we're going to unroll that for you. But I wanted to share one more very quick thing, and that is this.
Sure.
If you, my friend, are suffering through the pangs of guilt over a crime you committed, you've never had a peaceful night of sleep, you've never had a relationship that lasted, you look at your own children and you just fear the day there's a knock on the door that says, put your hands behind your back. If you pick up the phone and call for help, you realize you're going to get a much better deal than if they show up at the door and say, put your hands behind your back. You have the right to remain silent. If they find you before you find them, you don't negotiate a deal. So if you've got something like that and you're listening to Body Bags today, friends, I'm encouraging you to pick up the phone and call and get it off your chest.
Yeah, it's an infection of the soul, of the spirit, I think. And it's almost like getting a boil lanced after all this time.
Getting a boil lanced.
Getting a boil lanced.
You said that. That was such a great Southern way you said that. It didn't come out as boil until I said it. You said bowl.
A bowl.
Yeah. That is... I get mocked every day for saying school, the way I say school. Okay. Yeah, because it's a California thing, I guess. But whenever I hear that boil, it's like you said, Lance, a boil. And I'm like, a bowl. How do you lance a bowl? I eat cereal out of a bowl. I don't.
Yeah. Well, not out of this one, you wouldn't.
Sorry.
But yeah,
No. Oh my goodness.
you would really. I think that there's been times in my life where I've done things that I'm ashamed of, and I didn't tell anybody. Of course, I wound up getting caught.
Yeah.
But because the truth is always going to find you out most of the time. But yeah, in this case, you realize with this young girl, and she's 17 years old, David, junior in high school.
Yep.
I would imagine that the lion's share of her family is gone. I know that her mom and dad passed away.
Surely.
A couple of years back, a few years back, as a matter of fact. But one of the people that's the real hero in this, and I encourage you to look this woman up, is actually this young girl's cousin by the name of Kathy Tull. Like Jethro,
right.
Tull. And it's because of her and other family members that still exist. They kept her alive in their memories. And, I was thinking, we're in the midst of the holidays right now. And as of this recording, and, I always think about, the empty chairs around the table. And I'm sure that with Miss Tull, she still has a memory probably of being Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of the other Easter dinner after church and whatnot. And, there's always been that vacant chair. And it's one thing if you lose somebody to natural death, Dave, but when you have a young life that is snuffed out like this, where because this is a small town. This is in Wahoo, Nebraska. The facts because they have stayed with you all of these many years. They know that she was found in this desolate area. They know that she was abandoned in a ditch. They know that she was brutalized with an edged weapon and left for dead out there in the middle of nowhere in March of 1969.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I have memories from the 60s when I was a very small child of ladies wearing white gloves. I don't know if you have a memory of that or if you ever saw that. And there was always, of course, the requisite patent leather purse. But I do remember white gloves that were worn generally on formal occasions, those sorts of things. And I don't know, those gloves are generally kind of a linen. And, in March, in Nebraska, it's, as my granny used to say, it's colder than a well digger's butt in Idaho. I don't know where she goes to validate that statement, but or where she went to validate that statement. I'm assuming that all well diggers' butts in Idaho are cold, but it would have been very, very cold. And this is one of the descriptors that I saw about this poor young girl, Dave, is that those white gloves that she was wearing had turned red. They had turned red because they were super saturated with her blood. And I don't know, for all I know, maybe the blood of the assailant, Dave.
Well, it happened March 25th into 26, 1969. Mary Kay Heese's body was found in a roadside ditch south of Wahoo, Nebraska, just after midnight, March 26, 1969. Hesse had been stabbed over a dozen times, and the reason there was blood on those gloves, defensive wounds, showed that she fought hard against her killer. The part about fighting back that we know is it leaves evidence. It leaves evidence on the killer, and oftentimes it leaves evidence on the victim of the killer. Fighting back actually does something for the investigation, and it still went cold. Now, I don't know what investigation was like in 1969. I'm going to back up and think, okay, you're going to look for fingerprints. You're going to look for blood type. That's about all you've got there.
Yeah.
And you're going to look for what?
Well, I think that let's just roll with this idea that these are, in fact, I guess you could say if they were white leather gloves, this could happen too. But just think if they were those little dainty white linen gloves, guess what that could capture? It could actually capture hair off of potential contact that she had, whether it be the perpetrator or maybe a friend. And this is something we don't really talk a lot about on body bags. We spend a lot of time talking about DNA, but I have no inside knowledge, so I don't know if fiber evidence was found on those gloves. But one of the things that we do is that our people in trace evidence will do is they'll look for hairs. Now, you've got several different types of hairs. Obviously, first off, you have to say, well, is this an animal hair or is it human hair? And if it's a fiber, you have to determine, is it a synthetic fiber or is it a naturally occurring fiber? Okay. So you've got a myriad of things that it could be. And then if it is a human hair, you look for morphology of the hair. That is, it's a microscopic examination where every type of hair out there will have something that is unique about it. Now, you can classify it into multiple categories, and you can't do too much. You can't go absent DNA. You can't dig too deep with it, but you can determine many times certain types of hair will have racial characteristics. Many times they do, as a matter of fact. You can also, in the case of people that dye their hair, did you know when you throw a hair under a microscope and take a look at it, you can see the little boundaries of the dye, and you can see the extension of the hair as it is growing up the shaft. Have you ever seen somebody that has like blonde hair and they've got black roots?
Right.
Well, if you look at that, for instance, under a microscope, you can actually see the root and you can see the demarcation where that old hair is growing out.
Oh, wow.
And you can actually establish a time with it. If you've got gray hair, you know that odds are that you're dealing with somebody that is in an upper age range here, as opposed to being a younger person. So there's kind of a way to whittle those things down. So the devil is in the details, relative to this. If she is, and I have no reason to believe that she was not, if she's completely clothed, you can actually see handprints. If there's this much blood on her body, there's a high probability that the perpetrator would have had blood transfer to their hands. Now, I've seen cases where I've actually seen contact blood in the form of a handprint. Now, you can't really get a lot of detail out of it, but you can see, like, if someone touches someone's cheek with an open hand, and you can see that impression that's left behind by the bloody handprint. It's transferred over. You can see it on the surface of clothing. Had a lady that broke a knife off in her drunk husband's back because he had been belt whipping her for a month. And you could see where she leveraged herself on top of his body with her left hand as she's driving the knife into his back with her right hand, and actually broke the blade off in his back. It was like a Walmart steak knife, something you'd buy your kids before you send them off to college, cheap steak knife. And you can actually see, you can understand movement by that. I don't know how sophisticated they would have been at that point in time in Wahoo, Nebraska. The other thing I would draw into question here is who would have done the evidence collection on her body. Now, Nebraska does, or still does, have county coroners. So I wonder if a local coroner would have done the autopsy, because I cannot imagine how many homicides they actually had in this little town back then. It gives me pause and makes me think, well, Dave, how many miles did you say? I can't recall. Is it from Omaha? Was it like 80 or 90?
It's not under 100 miles.
Yeah, it's not an unreasonable distance for them to have taken a case like this to like Omaha, where they may have had a board certified forensic pathologist. And maybe the state police would have gotten involved as far as the collection of evidence. Because now, and refresh my memory again, we're talking 55 years later, anything they would have collected, brother, at that autopsy would have been shelved. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because we know for a fact this case went cold.
Yeah.
It has been sitting there low these many years, and you think, well, what did they do with it? What did they do with it? How was it treated? How was it handled? And has anybody taken it and cracked the seals on those bags since that moment in time and done a reassessment of those items? It's hard to understand, what they may have done with the clothing and the other items during this period of time, 55 years, over a 55-year period.
One of the amazing things about this case, Joe, is it did go cold, and her body was found less than 5 miles from her own home.
Yeah.
And that bears repeating, because the family, I was reading over some of the things the family has posted, and they have, you can hear pain in their voice when they're writing about the time and how they've raked themselves over the coals over why didn't we do X, Y, and Z. And also how they never let this case, we say it went cold. It went cold from the standpoint that law enforcement doesn't have the means to keep a case open and active every day, searching for answers. They do it as long as they can, and then another case with fresher evidence comes in, and another one piles on, and pretty soon you've got 10, and it's a year or two later. And yeah. I'm not making excuses for cases going cold, but that is what happens. It's the reality of the world that we live.
Yeah, it's almost put it in economic terms. Economic or economic?
Economic, either way.
It's compounding interest. I mean, it really is. It bills out that way, because there are going to be cold cases, and there's a lot of cold cases. The only cold cases that we are really aware of are those things that have captured the imagination, for all of these years. Now, people would say that Jean Bonnet, for instance, is not a cold case, but let's face it, it's kind of a cold case. Jack the Ripper, for instance. Jack the Ripper is a cold case, but people are fascinated by that. A 17-year-old in a ditch in rural Nebraska is not... It's not going to capture the same attention as some mad butcher in the late 1800s walking through Whitehall and killing prostitutes and disemboweling them in a few instances and those sorts of things. It's just not, and that's a horrible thing to say. But as you know, you and I have both been in the media for a long time. You for a very long time. If it bleeds, it leads. And even those cases that bleed and lead, soon they vanish. They vanish from the mind because there's other things that are developing all along. It's interesting to me, though, in this case, I think that if you look at this case, Dave, you can learn a lot about the perpetrator here. And this is why. I think that this was something that the perpetrator would have known of her. He would have specifically targeted her. My understanding is she had been standing on a street corner that same night. And I do not mean any disrespect by that. I mean, people walked around in these small towns all the time, unlike nowadays where we're afraid to let our kids leave the house. You had kids that were on foot back then. They might be sitting on a street corner. And if you've got a predator that's out there and can snatch her off of the street corner, she's gone in a matter of seconds. First off, people people in 1969 didn't expect this sort of thing to happen, Dave. It just didn't. It was a different world back then. But going to my point, we can learn a lot about the person that did this based upon the deposition of her body. They had to have a vehicle because now they're, not that Wahoo is a huge metropolitan area, but compared to where she was found 5 miles away, this location where she's found is isolated. He would have to have intestinal fortitude to snatch her, just out of the blue like this. He would have to have a plan. I don't know that the plan really worked out the way that this individual may have thought that it would. He's driving her away. And this is something that is that he expedited because he didn't go off into farmland. Remember our two moms that were dumped in a field in Oklahoma?
Yeah.
They were prepped for that. And I should say not dumped, but buried. They went to a specific location that was planned out. Dave, this perpetrator dumped this poor child's body in a ditch adjacent to a roadway. This is something that happened really quick. If she knows that something's up, I think the fight probably started in the car. It probably started in the car and she's resisting. And can you imagine you've got this 17-year-old that you think is going to be compliant. You're driving down the road with one hand and she's fighting back. And you've had all you can take by the time you get 5 miles out, Dave.
And it's interesting because she was reported missing, Joe. You mentioned how she was seen on the street. She was seen. In 1969, we did walk around and ride our bikes and we did things. And if you were a 17-year-old in 1969, yes, you were out. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. It is now. I mean, I would not let my child out of my sight at night on the street, period. In my neighborhood, I wouldn't. No. And I live in a nice neighborhood, but I wouldn't allow that to happen here. And the one thing that we do know about this is that she did fight back, and it was in the fighting back with the stranger that allowed her. A tip came in. We mentioned the tip line. You have to remember, people did see something. There were clues that were left by her. Mary Kay, she's the one that fought, and she was disposed of. She wasn't controlled. She wasn't taken out into a barn and hidden. She was just disposed of like you're throwing a cigarette out going down the road. Done. Boom. Get out.
Yeah.
And it's a total lack of conscience to care so little about another human being to do that. I don't even know, was she dead when she hit the dirt in the ditch, or snow? I believe there was snow on the ground when she was disposed of on the side of the road. But the tips that came in, people did see her that night. They did see some things. They saw other people. There were, for years, rumors about what took place, but nobody could solve it. We mentioned that tip line, Joe. You realize somebody did call that tip line with a tip. It was a tip so specific that they exhumed the body of Mary Kay Heese. And it was the exhumation that led to the evidence, that led to people like you, Joe, getting the actual physical evidence in front of you and going, hey, I think we've got something here.
And it is. And I think going back to our earlier premise, Dave, the idea that you can walk away from something, potentially something that is so horrific, and you think that it's just going to fade into the background. But I got to tell you, whether it's in a ditch or the depths of some swamp somewhere or in a 6-foot deep grave, there's always knowledge to be gleaned by following the clues.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey, Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational.
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Brother, you put it out there. I got to ask you, Dave, what do you think they were looking for in that grave with the body of a 17-year-old girl that has been buried for decades in that cold, cold earth out there? What do you think that they were looking for?
You know, I've tried to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I've looked every which way I can, and I'm thinking, okay, Joe, what can you find from a body that has been, I know, embalmed and everything else, but what can you possibly find of evidentiary value on a corpse that's been in the ground for 55 years? And I mean that in the nicest way possible. If you open it up and the air hits it, does it turn into dust like we've seen in movies sometimes? Or
No.
we're going to open it up and see that the person's hair continues to grow and their nails are like Howard Hughes? I don't know. Is it going to be the crypt keeper, or is it going to look like a person? What are we going to see? I have no idea.
Well, a lot of that depends upon how well she was embalmed. And
really? Okay, that does come into play then.
It does, to preservation of the body itself in its postmortem state. And keep in mind, she would have been autopsied. They have to track all of these wounds. I think you had mentioned, and I know that there were 12 stab wounds or sharp force injury wounds.
They had enough injuries on her to know that there was a fight, that it was involved. She had 12. Her stab wounds were mostly in the back, but 12 major stab wounds, and she had defensive wounds. And I don't know if they count those as stab wounds, or like would you count?
No, unless
on the arm or hand.
Well, if we have to understand that it's a stab wound if the knife pierces the skin with the tip and passes into that element of the body, and that can be in the forearm because I've had people that throw their arms up defensively, and the knife is driven into their forearm, and certainly in the hands. Now, most of the time with the hands, you've got people that are grabbing the blade. But Dave, let me throw something out to you real quick. It's one of my Morganisms, I guess, that I use with that I use with my students, and it has, I think that it bears fruit in forensics, and I would submit in classic sciences too, but particularly in forensics, because we're talking about trying to determine who a perpetrator might be. I hold that negative findings are just as important as positive findings. I think at least that they were looking for something on the body that they had been seeking for a protracted period of time. They had to exhume her body to see if it was there. I don't think it was there. I think the family possessed it the entire time. And what I'm talking about is a necklace that she always wore. She always wore a necklace, and for years they thought that it was lost. And interestingly enough, Miss Tull, who is Mary Kay's cousin, has been in possession of this necklace. And more than likely what happened was that when they went into that casketed body, they opened the body or opened the casket up, and they're looking for this thing. And it's like a little silver necklace that's got a silver cross on the end of it. It wasn't there. And people had been looking for it for years. And I think that perhaps, just perhaps, Dave, this necklace was collected at the autopsy, and the family, and let me see, how can I put this? The powers that be at that time did not see value in this piece of jewelry. And we say, you know how we'll say things like we have that kind of boilerplate statement, Dave, that I've always exposed you to about
Yes.
no signs of forced entry or struggle.
Right.
Another piece to this that we make comment about is that we always make comment about, does the subject have their wallet? Okay.
Right.
Is the subject wearing jewelry? Because if you've got a homicide victim that is in possession of these items still on their person, then your suspicion of robbery is declining all the while because they've got items of value. Maybe the answer rests somewhere, but for whatever reason, they may not have followed that lead at that moment in time. And Dave, I really wonder if that necklace, which it turns out the family was in possession of and thought that it had been lost for years and years, I wonder if after all this time, that necklace had scientific value to it and it was turned over to the police.
Okay, because the police did develop leads. They believe that Mary Kay got into a car with two men. They believe that these were men that they were going to go for a ride, not an uncommon thing in 1969 for teenagers to hop in the car and go for a ride. It was something we did. I was at the tail end of that in my years. But teens back in the day, in the 60s and early 70s, they would go out and ride. There weren't a lot of things for young people to do. And going out riding around, finding a place where people are hanging out, having a party. And that's what they suggested she did. And that she got into a car with two people that she knew, at least one of them that she knew from a restaurant, and got in the car. Now, they had these two people in mind, but one of them committed suicide in 1977. So he was done at, the investigation had already gone cold by then, and he's dead.
Right.
The car that they believe was used allegedly got dumped into a pond somewhere. And by the time they got around to finding it, there wasn't anything they could find. They didn't have the money to go pull it out. So again, a dead end, so to speak. But do you really, what would be the point of going in for something that, to find a piece of jewelry that the family has? Does the family know they have it? And they know that's what they're looking for? Are they hoping that it'll gain attention that it'll bring attention back to this crime that has gone unsolved? And that because, whenever a body is disinterred or what is it called?
Disinterred.
Okay.
Exhumed.
Exhumed. That's what I was trying to think.
Yeah, right.
We talk about it. And, if it's an old murder like that, yes, we're going to be talking about that. What did they do it for? Yeah. And if they think maybe there's somebody out here that's still alive, maybe this will make him or her crack. Maybe they'll cough up some information because, hey, a tip was called in to the tip line set up by her cousin. Think about that, Joe.
Yeah, I know. And Dave, depending upon how well her body was embalmed, those injuries would still be appreciable after this period of time. If they had prevented water intrusion out there, say the water table hadn't risen to where it had impacted the body so that the body was so degraded by that and the casket had remained sealed, I'll be very anxious to see if there is ever an autopsy report. First off, I would love to see the original autopsy report.
Right.
Okay. Documenting these injuries. And they're not going to make that available to the public because this is an active case now. Right. After all and may I say it again? I love saying this 55 years later. And then I would like to see the second report that is generated by a forensic pathologist in the wake of the exhumation to understand what was left behind. And also if there was a directive on the part of the investigators saying, look, Doc, when you crack this casket open, first off, we want to be there. All right. There's something specific we're looking for, because what are you going to be looking for in an exhumation 55 years later that you didn't see all those years back? Because there is a significant chance that the body will be degraded to the point where a lot of stuff is not going to be appreciable. Even her funeral clothing is probably going to be greatly degraded. The lining of the casket is going to be degraded. And some of that is just over time. It's not necessarily having to do with the water table. So they're taking a big chance here, and getting an order for exhumation, Dave, is not something that that is easily done. I'm having flashbacks to Tammy Daybell right now, where, her body was exhumed after all those years. And it's not something that's easy to do. You have to go before a judge, and the judge, it's almost like looking at a warrant. Before a judge will sign off on a warrant, or a magistrate, you have to have everything in place. They don't like cracking graves open. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you, it's tougher to get an order of exhumation than it is to get a search warrant.
Oh, wow.
They don't like to do it. It's something, and I've gone round and round with them in cases over the course of my career working with the police, that they want to get an exhumation, and judges, it doesn't matter if it was in Georgia or Louisiana, they don't like to do it, man.
Well, eventually, after pushing, Kathy Tull stayed on the case. That's the cousin.
Yeah.
She stayed on it. She posted the social media. She made the calls to police. She was the driving force behind getting the exhumation done. And she said she cried. She watched it happen at a distance the whole time, crying. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing by getting this to happen? But it was a series of events that took place from the tip line that led to the exhumation, that led to people coming forward, that led to them developing an actual suspect. And Joe, the suspect they're talking about was somebody who had been in prison in the 60s. He had been in there for forgery and escape, and was out at the time the murder happened. And since that time has been in and out of trouble, has lived in several states. I think it's 9 states and 12 different places. I mean, it's a large amount of moving around. But after 55 years, they have a suspect, and they have him in custody. They indicted him. How do you go about that, Joe? Tell us what happens in the indictment, because don't you get information, and you I'm going to go to a forensic guy and tell me, explain this. What does this mean? It can't be a cup that all of a sudden I found.
No, it can't be. It's got to be the totality of the evidence that you've collected up until that point. That in the word that you need to focus on here is compelling, because what you're doing is, if you're a law enforcement officer, you're a salesman at this point in time. I hate to reduce it down to that, but I don't think that you have to sell it to the court. First off, you got to sell it to the DA. And these are political animals. So is a DA, are they worth sticking their neck out on a 55-year-old case to say, all right, we will enjoin with you on this thing. We're going to help you structure an arrest warrant, which they would have. The DA would have been front and center on this. And they're going to go to a judge, and they're going to get this thing signed off. And Dave, he wasn't in Nebraska. He was in Oklahoma. And so now I would imagine that you have probably gotten the local authorities in, I think it's Ponca City, Oklahoma. And you would have probably involved U.S. Marshals as well. And they're going to roll in. They're going to roll in, and they're going to be kicking doors in.
That's what I was watching the news coverage, because there was a local TV station there that's been following this and doing an excellent job. I love local news. You find some really, really good reporting. Yes, you do. And they did a good job. They followed this case. They were very respectful. I reviewed so much of the coverage, but I can't tell you enough. I cannot express this to you enough. If you have a missing person in your family, a crime that's a cold case, you have to be the driving force. In this case, it was Kathy Tull, the cousin, who just could not let this go away. She pushed the bus. She pushed everything. She was there for each step of the way, calling on a regular basis. And that's how they were actually able to bring a man who is now 77 years old, Joe. But what would that make him at the time? 22?
22 years old. Early
at 22
20s,
years old, he took the life of a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And got away with it. He's now a 77-year-old man on oxygen.
Yeah. Let me tell you how this is going to play out. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Guess where the blame is going to be put?
Where?
The guy that took his life.
Yeah.
That's where the blame is going to be. He's like, yeah. Well, I was there. I can, this is being telegraphed.
Yeah.
I can see it coming a mile away. That's what's going to happen because, as we all said, and as you and I have said many times, you can accuse the dead of anything you want to because they can't defend themselves. But Dave, a beautiful comment on your part relative to this. You might feel hopeless in your life that if you've got a loved one out there that is, their case is unsolved. I think about all the people that have approached me over the years and still approach me today. You keep pressing and you never know. It might wind up in a conclusion in case that you didn't expect that just came out of nowhere. But we're glad to say that at this point in time, though he is innocent until proven guilty, right now, Joseph A. Ambrose, who is 77 years old, is now in custody and he's awaiting his day in court. And we will see what else this case has to bear. I got to tell you, I got to follow up on this and find out what is revealed because it is going to be something for the ages, I believe. Because just the simple fact that this young girl's body was exhumed after all of this time. What did they find? What was revealed? And what still remains in store for the conclusion of this case? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.